Park Hyun-woo stared at the screens in front of him as red warning lights flashed across the command center. The peaceful mining colony on Kepler 442b had turned into a war zone in just 3 hours. Outside the reinforced windows, he could see the dark shapes of enemy ships blocking out the stars. The Vorthak Empire had come without warning. Their massive warships dropped out of space like metal storms, raining fire on everything below. The colony's defense turrets fired back with desperate energy, but their small weapons barely scratched the thick armor of the invading fleet. "Sir, we lost Section 7, called out Kim So-jin from her station. The young scientist's hands shook as she worked the controls. "The mining facility is gone. All of it." Hyun-woo closed his eyes for a moment. Section 7 housed 200 families, men, women, children, who had come here to build a better life among the stars. Now they were gone, turned to ash by alien weapons that cared nothing for human dreams. "How many ships?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would be bad. 43. "Confirmed," replied Lee Tae-wook from the sensor station. "More coming through the jump point every few minutes. They're not just here to raid. They want to take everything." The Vorthak were known across the galaxy as conquerors. They swept through star systems like a plague, taking resources and enslaving any survivors. Whole civilizations had vanished under their boots. Now it was humanity's turn. "Sir, incoming transmission from the lead ship," announced Choi Min-ho. "At communications. Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, showing a creature that looked like it had crawled out of nightmares. The Vorthak commander stood nearly 3 meters tall, covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb light. Its eyes glowed red in a face full of sharp teeth. "Humans of this pathetic colony," the alien spoke in heavily accented standard. "You will surrender now. Your resistance is meaningless. Your weapons are toys. Your deaths will be quick if you do not make us wait." Hyun-woo stepped forward. "This is Administrator Park Hyun-woo. These people are under the protection of the Galactic Accords. You have no right to attack a peaceful settlement." The Vorthak commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your accords mean nothing here, small human. The strong take what they wish. The weak become slaves or corpses. Choose now." The transmission cut off. Around the command center, the colonists looked at their administrator with hope and fear mixed in their eyes. They trusted him to save them, but what could one man do against an entire fleet? "Send out the distress signal," Hyun-woo ordered. "All frequencies, maximum power." "Sir, that will drain our remaining power reserves," warned Chief Engineer Yang Do-hyun. "If no one comes, we won't have energy for life support." "If no one comes, we won't need life support," Hyun-woo replied grimly. Kim So-jin worked frantically at her station. As the colony's xenobiologist, she knew more about the planet's unique properties than anyone else. The crystal formations deep underground could boost their signal strength beyond normal limits. "I can use the resonance crystals," she said, her fingers flying over the controls. "If I route the signal through the mining tunnels, it should reach at least 3 sectors." "Do it." The distress signal went out into the void, carrying with it the desperate hope of 8,000 colonists. It reached the proud Etherian Republic first, a species of tall, graceful beings who prided themselves on honor and justice. Their response came within hours. "Colony Kepler 442b. This is the Etherian Council. We have received your distress call. Unfortunately, we cannot provide military assistance against the Vorthak Empire. Such action would risk war with a superior force. We regret we cannot help. May your deaths be swift." The next response came from the Nexus Collective, a union of technological species who had turned their bodies into machines long ago. Their mechanical voices held no emotion as they delivered their verdict: biological. "Colony designation Kepler 442b. Your request for aid is acknowledged but denied. Probability calculations show intervention would result in collective assets being destroyed. This is unacceptable." Terminating communication. One by one, every advanced civilization in the galaxy sent the same message. The Kyrion Dominion, ancient and wise, politely declined. The Stellar Federation expressed sympathy but cited prior commitments. The trade consortium calculated that helping would cost more than ignoring the problem. "They're all cowards," spat Security Chief Shin Jae-ho as another rejection came through. "They have the power to stop this, but they won't risk their precious ships." Outside, the Vorthak had begun landing troops. Massive dropships descended through the atmosphere like falling meteors, disgorging thousands of soldiers onto the planet's surface. The colonists' small security force fought bravely, but they were miners and scientists, not warriors. "Sir, the Vorthak are demanding we open the shelters," reported Choi Min-ho. "They say they will use gas weapons if we don't comply." Hyun-woo watched the tactical display as enemy forces surrounded their position. The reinforced shelters could hold out for maybe 2 days, but without help, it would just delay the inevitable. "Keep trying," he told Kim So-jin. "Boost the signal further. Someone out there has to care." The scientist nodded and returned to her work. She rerouted power from non-essential systems, pushing the transmission array beyond safe limits. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits as the signal grew stronger, reaching deeper into space than any human transmission had ever gone. Unknown to the colonists, their desperate plea traveled far beyond the civilized galaxy. It passed through empty sectors where no ships flew, across the void between spiral arms, until it reached a region that most galactic maps marked simply as frontier territory. There, in the darkness between stars, sensors that had been quietly listening for decades picked up the transmission. Automated systems woke sleeping crews and forwarded the message to command centers on distant worlds. On a blue-green planet near the galaxy's edge, Admiral Choi Mi-young read the distress call for the 3rd time. Around her, the war room of Earth's Terran Defense Force buzzed with activity as officers analyzed the situation. "It's definitely authentic," reported Intelligence Officer Park Jin-soo. "The transmission patterns match human colonial standards. 8,000 civilians trapped on a mining world, under attack by a force of unknown size, the Vorthak Empire," added Captain Lee Tae-min, consulting his datapad. "Our long-range scouts have been tracking their expansion for years. They're moving toward the outer rim, toward us." Admiral Choi studied the star charts. Earth lay directly in the path of Vorthak expansion. It wasn't a matter of if they would come, but when. "How long would it take to reach them?" she asked. 18 days at maximum burn," replied Navigation Officer Bae So-young. "But sir, our fleet isn't designed for long-range operations. We'd be fighting far from any support." The Admiral looked around the room at her officers. They were young, most of them. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, and their military was still small and untested. Against an empire that had conquered dozens of worlds, they would be vastly outnumbered. But as she read the colonists' message again, she remembered why Earth had built a military in the first place. "Not to conquer or expand, but to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Prep the fleet," she ordered. "All available ships. We leave in 6 hours." "Sir," Captain Lee spoke carefully, "the other species all refuse to help. They have larger fleets, more experience. If they won't take the risk, then they're not the species I thought they were," Admiral Choi replied. "We answer the call. That's what humans do." Back on Kepler 442b, the situation grew more desperate, by the hour. Vorthak soldiers had breached the outer perimeter and were advancing on the main shelter complex. Their weapons cut through defensive barriers like paper, and their armor shrugged off the colonists' small arms' fire in the command center. Kim So-jin continued boosting the signal, hoping against hope that someone would hear their plea. She didn't know that 18 days away, Earth's entire fleet was already burning through space toward them. All she knew was that 8,000 innocent people depended on her keeping that transmission alive, no matter what it cost. The galaxy's established powers had shown their true nature. When faced with evil, they chose safety over justice. But somewhere in the darkness between stars, another kind of species was coming, and they had a very different answer to give. Captain Lee Tae-min stood on the bridge of the battleship Incheon's Pride, watching the stars streak past as his ship burned through hyperspace at maximum speed. The distress call from Kepler 442b played on repeat through the ship's communication system, a constant reminder of why they were rushing into what might be their deaths. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency. They were professionals, trained for exactly this kind of mission, but everyone knew the odds were against them. Earth's entire fleet consisted of only 200 ships, most of them small destroyers and frigates built for patrol duty around. The Sol system captain called Communications Officer Park Min Jung from her station. "We're receiving updates from Admiral Choi. The full fleet is maintaining formation. No mechanical failures so far." Taemin nodded. "Any word from the colony?" "Still transmitting. The signal is getting weaker, but they're alive." That was something, at least. 18 days was a long time to hold out against a Vorthak siege, but humans were stubborn when they needed to be. In her quarters below, Dr. Yoon Soo-jin studied everything Earth's intelligence services had gathered about Vorthak technology. As the fleet's chief scientist, she needed to understand what they would be facing. The data wasn't encouraging. Vorthak ships were built like floating fortresses, with thick armor and powerful energy shields. Their plasma weapons could melt through most known materials, and their soldiers were genetically enhanced for combat. On paper, they outclassed human technology in every category. But paper didn't account for human ingenuity. "Doctor," her assistant Kim Chang-ho said, looking up from his console. "I think I found something interesting in the weapons analysis." Soo-jin moved to look over his shoulder. On the screen was a breakdown of Vorthak plasma cannon efficiency ratings. "Look at the power distribution," Chang-ho pointed to a series of graphs. "Their weapons are incredibly powerful, but they draw massive amounts of energy. If we could disrupt their power flow somehow, their ships would be floating scrap metal," Soo-jin finished. "But how do we get close enough to their power systems without being turned to plasma first?" That was the question that had been bothering her for days. Human ships were faster and more maneuverable than Vorthak vessels, but speed meant nothing if you couldn't survive long enough to use it. Meanwhile, in the fleet's command ship, Admiral Choi Mi-young called together her senior staff for a final strategy meeting. The conference room was cramped, designed for patrol missions rather than fleet operations, but it would have to do. "Status report," she said as the last officer took his seat. 178 ships ready for combat," reported Fleet Captain Oh Dong-jun. "We had to leave 22 vessels behind for essential system defense. Ammunition and supplies, full loads on everything. We can fight for maybe 3 days at maximum intensity before we start running low on ship-to-ship missiles." The Admiral studied the tactical display showing their projected arrival at Kepler 442b. Intelligence estimated the Vorthak had at least 40 ships in the system, possibly more. Even with their technological advantages, the numbers were heavily against Earth's forces. "Options?" she asked. Captain Kang Woo-jin, the fleet's tactical specialist, stood up. "We could try a hit-and-run approach. Jump in, hit their smaller ships, then retreat before they can bring their main fleet to bear. That leaves the colonists still under siege." "Yes, ma'am, but it might convince the Vorthak that the system isn't worth the cost." Admiral Choi shook her head. "We didn't come all this way to maybe save some people. We came to definitely save all of them." "Ma'am," interjected Marine Colonel Shin Jae-ho, "my boys are ready for a boarding action if we can get close enough. Vorthak ships are built for ship-to-ship combat, not repelling borders. Their corridors are wide and straight, perfect for human assault tactics. That's assuming we can get through their shields and armor." "We'll find a way," the colonel said with quiet confidence. "Marines always do." As the meeting continued, Engineer Young Do-hyun was in the fleet's workshop ships, working on modifications that might give them an edge. Human ships weren't as heavily armed as Vorthak vessels, but they were more adaptable. "Try routing the auxiliary power through the main weapons array," he told his team as they worked on the frigate Sol's hammer. "If we can overload the plasma conduits for just a few seconds, we might be able to punch through their shields. That'll burn out half our systems," warned Chief Petty Officer Bae So-young. "Better than being dead," Do-hyun replied. The truth was, everyone in the fleet knew they were probably flying to their deaths. Earth's government had made that clear when they approved the mission. This wasn't about military victory in any traditional sense. This was about making a statement. Humanity would not abandon innocent people, no matter the cost. Back on Kepler 442b, the situation had grown desperate. Vorthak forces had broken through the outer defenses and were now assaulting the main shelter complex directly. Administrator Park Hyun-woo watched helplessly as enemy soldiers used heavy weapons to blast through reinforced doors. "How long until they reach the command center?" he asked Security Chief Shin Jae-ho. maybe 6 hours. 8 if we blow the connecting tunnels. Do it. The explosions shook the entire complex as charges detonated in carefully planned sequences. Tons of rock and metal collapsed into the access tunnels, buying them precious time. But everyone knew it was only delaying the inevitable. In her laboratory, Dr. Kim So-jin continued working to boost their distress signal. She had pushed the transmission array far beyond safe limits, and sparks flew from overloaded circuits with every pulse. Several of her assistants had been injured by electrical fires, but she couldn't stop. "Doctor, the power grid is failing," reported technician Park Jun-ho. "We can't maintain this output much longer. We have to try. Someone out there might still be listening." What she didn't know was that Earth's fleet was now only 2 days away, burning through space at speeds that stressed their engines to the breaking point. In the flagship's communications center, operators listened constantly for any sign that the colony was still alive. "Signal strength is down to 12%, reported Lieutenant Jung Min-ah. "But it's still there. They're still fighting." Admiral Choi nodded grimly. 2 more days. They just had to hold on for 2 more days. In the fleet's medical bay, doctors prepared for what everyone knew would be massive casualties. Earth's ships were tough, but they weren't designed to fight an enemy with superior weapons and numbers. Many of the young sailors racing toward Kepler 442b would never see Earth again. "Trauma teams ready?" asked Chief Medical Officer Dr. Lee Min-ho, all stations. "Prepared. Emergency supplies distributed to every ship." It wasn't enough, and everyone knew it, but it was what they had. As the fleet continued its desperate journey, communications with other galactic powers brought nothing but discouragement. The Etherian Republic had officially condemned Earth's reckless intervention and warned them against destabilizing the region. The Nexus Collective calculated a 97% chance of human defeat and suggested they reconsider this illogical course of action. None of the galaxy's great powers offered help. Some sent messages expressing sympathy for the human fleet's inevitable sacrifice, but none offered ships or supplies. To them, this was simply another minor species making a foolish gesture before being crushed by superior force. What they didn't understand was that humans had a different definition of foolish. Captain Lee Tae-min stood in his ship's chapel, looking at the simple cross mounted on the bulkhead. Many of his crew were there with him, preparing for what might be their final battle. Some prayed to various gods, others simply sat in quiet contemplation. "Captain," asked Petty Officer Kim Dong-wook, "do you really think we can win?" Tae-min considered the question carefully. "Win? Maybe not in the way the history books will measure it. But save those people? Make the Vorthak think twice before attacking another human colony? Show the galaxy that some species still believe in doing the right thing even when it's hard? Yes, I think we can win those things." The young sailor nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. As Earth's fleet drew closer to Kepler 442b, final preparations began. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Marines cleaned their rifles and sharpened their combat knives. Engineers ran diagnostics on systems that would need to perform perfectly under impossible conditions. In her quarters, Admiral Choi recorded a message to be sent back to Earth if none of them survived. "By the time you receive this, the battle for Kepler 442b will be over. We went because someone needed help, and everyone else turned away. We went because it was right. If we don't come home, remember that we chose this. Remember that when evil comes for you, there are people willing to stand in its way." She sealed the message and returned to the bridge. Outside the viewports, the stars wheeled past in their ancient patterns, uncaring of human struggles and human choices, but somewhere ahead in the darkness, 8,000 innocent people waited for rescue, and Earth's children were coming to answer their call. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you woke up the species that everyone else had been careful to leave sleeping. General Vorthak Nem stood in the command center of his flagship, watching his forces tear apart the human mining colony below. The siege had lasted 16 days, and his patience was running thin. These stubborn creatures refused to surrender, even though their defeat was certain. "Status report," he growled to his communications officer. "The main shelter complex continues to resist. They have collapsed several access tunnels, but our heavy units are making progress. Estimated time to complete conquest, 6 hours. The general nodded his massive scaled head. 6 hours to finish what should have taken 6 minutes. These humans were proving more troublesome than expected. But soon they would join the countless other species that had fallen before Vorthak might, "Sir," called the sensor operator, detecting. "Multiple hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system." Nem turned to the tactical display. Dozens of ships were dropping out of faster-than-light travel, forming up in what looked like an attack formation. The computer identified them as human vessels based on their energy signatures. "How many?" the general asked. 178. "Confirmed contacts. All appear to be military vessels." Nem studied the formation with professional interest. The ships were smaller than his own vessels, clearly built for speed rather than heavy combat. Their positioning showed some tactical knowledge, but nothing that concerned him. Identify the class types. Mostly destroyers and frigates. A few larger. Vessels that might be cruisers. No dreadnoughts or battleships detected. The general almost smiled. The humans had come to rescue their colonists with a fleet of patrol boats. It was almost touching in its futility. Open a channel to the human fleet. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of what appeared to be the human flagship. A human female in military uniform stood before the camera, her expression calm despite facing overwhelming odds. "This is Admiral Choi Mi-young of the Terran Defense Force," she said in clear standard. "You are in violation of galactic accords by attacking civilian targets. Withdraw immediately or we will engage." General Nem laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "I am General Vorthak Nem of the glorious Vorthak Empire. You command toys against warships, child. Your people below will die today. You may choose to die with them, or flee back to whatever worthless world spawned you." The human admiral's expression didn't change. "We choose to stay. All ships, begin attack approach." The transmission ended. Nem shook his head in amazement. These humans were either the bravest species he had ever encountered or the most foolish. "Probably both battle stations," he ordered. "Deploy the fleet in standard engagement formation. Let us show these children what real warfare looks like." Admiral Choi Mi-young stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the Vorthak fleet move to intercept them. The enemy vessels were massive, easily 3 times the size of Earth's largest ships. Their thick armor gleamed with the dull sheen of processed metals, and their weapons arrays bristled with more firepower than her entire fleet combined. Tactical analysis, Captain Kang. 43 Vorthak vessels confirmed. 7 of them are Dreadnought class, the rest heavy cruisers and destroyers. Their formation suggests they're planning to engage at medium range with their plasma weapons. Estimated casualties if we attack head-on. Kang hesitated. 60 to 70% losses in the first engagement, possibly more. The Admiral nodded. She had expected as much. But sometimes the right thing to do was also the impossible thing to do. All ships. This is Admiral Choi. Today, we fight not for victory, but for the principle that innocent people deserve protection. Some of us won't be going home, but we'll make sure those colonists do. Attack pattern Delta 7. May God watch over us all. The human fleet broke formation and accelerated toward the enemy. Earth's ships were fast, much faster than the heavy Vorthak vessels, but speed wouldn't help much once the shooting started. Captain Lee Tae-min gripped the arms of his command chair as the Incheon's Pride dove toward the enemy line. Around him, his crew worked with desperate efficiency, knowing they were probably flying into their graves' enemy weapons range in 30 seconds, reported Weapons Officer Park Jin-woo. "All power to forward shields. Prepare to engage." The Vorthak opened fire first. Massive plasma cannons erupted across their fleet, sending streams of superheated gas racing toward the approaching humans. The weapons were designed to overwhelm energy shields through sheer brute force, and they were devastatingly effective. The first human ship to die was the destroyer, Daigu's Revenge. Plasma fire washed over its shields, overloading them instantly, before melting through the hull like hot metal through ice. The ship broke apart in a ball of nuclear fire, taking its crew of 140 with it. 2 more destroyers followed within seconds, their hulls cracked open by weapons that could have leveled city blocks. The human fleet kept coming, dodging and weaving through the storm of plasma fire like moths dancing around flames. "Shields down to 40%, called the engineering station on Tae-min's ship. "Return fire, all weapons." Human missiles streaked toward the Vorthak line, much smaller than the enemy's plasma bolts but moving 3 times as fast. Most were intercepted by point defense systems, but a few got through to explode against alien armor with disappointing results. Our weapons aren't penetrating, reported Park Jin-woo. Their armor is too thick. Tae-min watched another human ship die in plasma fire. They were losing the battle before it had really begun. But then he remembered something from his training at the Naval Academy. All power to engines. Ramming speed, sir. You heard me. If our weapons won't work, we'll use the ship itself as a weapon. The Incheon's pride surged forward, breaking away from the main engagement and diving straight toward a Vorthak heavy cruiser. Plasma fire reached for the human ship, but Taemin's crew had become experts at evasive flying over the past few minutes. "Sir, they're trying to ram us," reported the sensor operator on the Vorthak vessel. The alien captain looked at his tactical display in confusion. Ramming attacks were considered primitive, something used by desperate pirates or suicidal fanatics. No professional military force would attempt such a thing, destroy them before they reach us. But the human ship was too fast and too close. The Incheon's pride slammed into the Vorthak cruiser's midship section at nearly half the speed of light, its nuclear reactor detonating on impact. Both vessels vanished in a miniature star that briefly outshone the system's sun. Across the battlefield, other human captains saw what Taemin had done and understood immediately. If their weapons wouldn't work, they would become weapons themselves. Destroyer Soul's hammer followed the Incheon's pride into glory, ramming a Vorthak destroyer and taking it down in mutual annihilation. The frigate Busan's Hope dove into the hangar bay of an enemy carrier, its explosion gutting the larger vessel from the inside. General Nem watched in growing horror as his fleet suffered losses that should have been impossible. These humans weren't fighting like any civilized species he had ever encountered. They weren't trying to disable his ships or force a surrender. They were killing his crews even if it meant dying themselves. "Sir, we're detecting nuclear detonations throughout our formation," reported his tactical officer. "The humans are using their reactors as weapons." "That's impossible. No species fights like that." But the evidence was spreading across his fleet like a plague. Every few minutes, another human ship would break through his defensive fire and slam into one of his vessels, trading its life for the lives of his crew. It was madness, but it was effective madness. "Sir, the heavy cruiser Dominion's Fist reports critical damage. They're requesting permission to withdraw." Nem looked at his tactical display. He had started the engagement with 43 ships. Now, he was down to 37, and more damage reports were coming in every minute. The humans had lost over half their fleet, but they showed no signs of retreating. All ships maintain formation. Focus fire on their command vessel. But even as he gave the order, Nem felt something he had never experienced in 30 years of warfare. Uncertainty. How do you fight an enemy that treats death like a tactical option? On the human flagship, Admiral. Choi watched her fleet die around her with a mixture of pride and grief. Each ship that fell took with it friends and colleagues she had known for years. But each ship that fell also took an enemy vessel with it. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the colony," reported Communications Officer Jung Min-ah put it through. The voice of Administrator Park Hyun-woo crackled through the speakers, filled with wonder and hope. "This is Kepler 442b Colony. We can see the battle from here. Are you really human ships? This is Admiral Choi Mi-young of Earth. We're here to get you out. But sir, there are so many enemy ships. How can you possibly win?" The Admiral looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. Young men and women who had volunteered to fly across the galaxy to save people they had never met, who were dying by the hundreds to protect 8,000 strangers. "We don't have to win," she said quietly. "We just have to make sure you survive." The battle raged for 3 more hours. When it finally ended, the human fleet had been reduced to 47 ships, most of them damaged. But the Vorthak had lost 19 vessels, including 2 of their precious dreadnoughts. General Nem stared at his casualty reports in disbelief. His empire had conquered dozens of worlds. Dr. Yoon Soo-jin worked through her 3rd straight day without sleep, her eyes red and strained as she studied the wreckage scattered across Kepler 442b's orbital space. The debris from the Great Battle told a story of desperate courage and alien technology, and she was determined to read every word. "Hand me that plasma conduit," she called to her assistant, Kim Chang-ho, as they floated through the twisted remains of a Vorthak heavy cruiser. The salvage operation had begun immediately after the enemy fleet's withdrawal. Earth's remaining ships had managed to recover several intact pieces of Vorthak technology, including weapon systems, shield generators, and most importantly, their power cores. "Doctor, look at this," Chang-ho said, pointing to a massive crystalline structure embedded in the alien ship's hull. "The energy readings are off the charts." Su-jin moved closer, her instruments scanning the crystal formation. "It's not just a power source. It's an amplifier. The Vorthak route all their ship's energy through these crystals to boost efficiency. Can we duplicate it? Maybe. But first we need to understand how they prevent it from overloading." Back on Earth, the news of humanity's first major space battle had electrified the population. Admiral Choi Mi-young's battered fleet had returned home as heroes, but their victory had come at a terrible cost. Over 3,000 young men and women had died in the cold darkness between stars, their sacrifice buying safety for 8,000 strangers. In the halls of Earth's government, emergency sessions debated. What came next? The Vorthak Empire would not forget this humiliation. They would return, probably with a much larger fleet. "We need to be ready," declared Defense Minister Park Jun-ho to the assembled council. "The Vorthak won't make the same mistake twice. Next time they'll bring enough ships to crush us completely." "Our entire fleet is down to 147 operational vessels," replied Admiral Oh Dong-jun, the new chief of naval operations. "Even with round-the-clock production, we can't build enough ships to match the Vorthak's numbers." "Then we don't match their numbers," said Dr. Su-jin, entering the council chamber with a tablet full of research data. "We match their technology." She activated the room's main display, showing detailed scans of the recovered Vorthak equipment. "Their weapons are more powerful than ours, but they're also more complex. More things that can go wrong. If we can adapt their technology to our simpler systems—" "How long?" asked the defense minister. "Give me 6 months and unlimited resources. I'll give you weapons that can punch through Vorthak armor." The council approved her request unanimously. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the Vorthak Empire was having its own emergency meetings. General Vorthak Nem stood before the High Command, his career hanging by a thread as he explained how a tiny human fleet had cost them 19 warships. "The humans fight like animals," he reported to the assembled leaders. "They show no regard for their own lives. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as projectiles." Supreme Commander Vorthak Gen, oldest and most feared of the Vorthak generals, leaned forward in his throne. "You lost 2 dreadnoughts to creatures flying patrol boats." "Yes, Supreme Commander. But the tactical data we gathered shows their weakness. They rely on speed and desperation rather than proper strategy. A larger force with better deployment could crush them easily. You will have your chance to prove this theory. General, assemble a fleet of 200 ships, return to human space, and eliminate every trace of their presence." Nem bowed low. "It will be done, Supreme Commander." But the general didn't know that human intelligence services had been monitoring Vorthak communications for months. Long-range sensor posts detected the massive fleet gathering in enemy space weeks before it. Was ready to move, Admiral Kim Chang-ho, the new commander of Earth's rebuilt fleet, studied the intelligence reports with growing concern. 200 Vorthak ships was more than Earth's entire navy, even counting the new vessels coming off the production lines. "Options?" he asked his staff. "We could retreat to the Sol system and make our stand there," suggested Captain Bae So-young. "Force them to attack us in our home territory." "That puts Earth at risk if we lose, sir," interjected Marine Colonel Oh Dong-jun. "What if we don't let them get that far? Hit them while they're still assembling before they can coordinate properly." The Admiral considered this. It was a desperate plan. But then again, desperate plans seemed to work for humanity. "Dr. Su-jin, are the new weapons ready for field testing?" The scientist's face appeared on the communication screen from her laboratory. "The prototype ships are ready. We've managed to integrate Vorthak power crystals with human weapon systems. The results are impressive." 3 months later, the human fleet that jumped into the Vorthak staging area bore little resemblance to the desperate force that had fought at Kepler 442b. Earth's shipyards had worked around the clock to produce new vessels, each one incorporating lessons learned from captured alien technology. Captain Park Jin-woo commanded the destroyer New Seoul, one of the first ships to mount the hybrid weapon systems. His plasma cannons were smaller than the Vorthak originals, but they drew power from human nuclear reactors pushed far beyond safe limits. Targets acquired, reported his weapons officer, Lieutenant Shin Jae-ho. Vorthak fleet is spread across 3 orbital positions around their supply base. Perfect. They're not expecting us to hit them here. The human fleet struck like a swarm of angry wasps, their ships diving through the Vorthak formation in coordinated attack runs. The new hybrid weapons proved devastatingly effective, cutting through alien armor that had seemed invincible just months before. But the real surprise came from humanity's fighter squadrons. Lieutenant Bae So-young led 30 small craft in a suicide run against the Vorthak flagship, each fighter carrying a single nuclear warhead. "Remember," she told her pilots over the radio, "we don't need to survive this. We just need to make sure they don't." The fighters dove through the enemy's defensive fire like bullets through rain. Most were destroyed before reaching their target, but 5 managed to penetrate the Vorthak ship's shields and detonate their warheads inside the vessel's hull. The flagship broke apart in a series of nuclear explosions that lit up the system like a second sun. General Nem watched his fleet disintegrate around him from the bridge of his remaining command ship. The humans had learned from their first encounter, but they still fought with the same suicidal determination that had shocked him at Kepler 442b. "Sir, we've lost 40% of our vessels," reported his tactical officer. "The humans are using some kind of improved weapons. Our armor isn't stopping them." "How is that possible? Our technology is centuries ahead of theirs." "Unknown, sir. But they're also using the same ramming tactics as before. We've lost 6 ships to direct collision." "Attacks!" Nem studied his tactical display in growing despair. The human fleet was smaller than his own, but they were fighting like cornered beasts. Every ship that fell took at least 1 Vorthak vessel with it, and sometimes more. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human fleet." The main screen showed a human male in military uniform, his expression calm despite the chaos of battle around him. "This is Admiral Kim Chang-ho of the Terran Defense Force. You are in violation of our territorial space. Withdraw immediately or face total destruction," Nem almost laughed. "You command perhaps 70 ships against my 120. What makes you think you can destroy us?" The human admiral smiled coldly. "Because we're willing to die to stop you. Are you willing to die to continue this attack?" The transmission ended, leaving Nem staring at a tactical display that told a story he didn't want to believe. His fleet was winning by any traditional measure, but they were losing ships at an unsustainable rate. At this pace, he might defeat the humans, but have nothing left to continue the war, sir. The heavy cruiser Vengeance's blade is requesting permission to withdraw. They've taken critical damage. Nem looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were professional soldiers, trained from birth for warfare. But he could see fear in their eyes. Fear of an enemy that fought like no one they had ever encountered. "Signal the fleet," he said quietly. "General withdrawal. We return to base." As the surviving Vorthak ships limped away from the battlefield, Admiral Chang-ho surveyed the damage to his own fleet. 38 ships lost, nearly 2,000 crew members dead. "But they had sent a clear message to the galaxy's would-be conquerors, sir," reported Captain Park Jin-woo from the New Seoul. "We're detecting multiple hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system. Unknown vessels approaching." Chang-ho felt his heart sink. If the Vorthak had brought reinforcements. But the ships that emerged from hyperspace weren't Vorthak. They were sleek vessels with unfamiliar design signatures, broadcasting peaceful intentions in a dozen languages. "This is Ambassador Kethron of the Hegemony Neutral Zone," came a transmission in accented standard. "We represent several independent worlds that have been impressed by humanity's recent actions. We would like to discuss mutual defense agreements." Chang-ho smiled. Word was spreading across the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear of Vorthak expansion were beginning to believe that resistance was possible. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he replied. "I think we have a lot to talk about." In the weeks that followed, more independent systems reached out to Earth. Ambassador Jung Min-ah stood before the Great Assembly of the Galactic Council, looking out at representatives from 300 different species. The massive chamber had been built to impress visitors with the power and majesty of galactic civilization. But today it felt more like a courtroom where the established order was on trial. "Honored representatives," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. 6 months ago, 8,000 innocent people called for help across the stars. Every major power in this chamber received that call. Every one of you had the ability to respond, and every one of you chose to do nothing. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The Etherian delegate rose from his crystal throne, his tall frame shimmering with indignation. "The human delegate speaks of matters she does not understand," he said in his melodious voice. "The Vorthak Empire commands thousands of ships across dozens of sectors. To challenge them would have meant war on a scale that could have consumed half the galaxy. So you chose to let innocent people die rather than risk your comfortable peace," Jung replied calmly. "That tells us everything we need to know about your civilization's priorities." The Nexus Collective's mechanical representative spoke next, its artificial voice devoid of emotion. Probability calculations clearly showed that intervention would result in massive casualties for minimal gain. The loss of 8,000 individuals versus the potential loss of billions in a galactic war was an acceptable trade-off. Acceptable to whom? Jung asked. To the children hiding in those shelters while alien soldiers hunted them? To the families who watched their homes burn while you calculated probabilities? She turned to address the entire assembly. Humanity received the same distress. Call you all did. We had every reason to ignore it. Our fleet was small, our technology inferior, our chances of success nearly zero. But we went anyway because someone needed help, and we were the only ones willing to give it. Supreme Counselor Vexhari of the ancient Kyrian Dominion leaned forward in his hover chair. "And what did your noble gesture accomplish, young human? You lost thousands of your own people in a futile gesture. The Vorthak still controlled dozens of worlds. The balance of power remains unchanged." Jung smiled, and there was something dangerous in that expression. "Does it? Tell me, Counselor, how many independent systems have reached out to you for mutual defense agreements in the past month?" The Kyrian delegate's expression darkened. "That is irrelevant to—" 47, Jung continued. 47 systems that had given up hope of ever standing up to the Vorthak have contacted Earth in the past 6 weeks. The Tyrian Republic has offered us their most advanced shield technology. The mining guilds are providing rare metals at cost. Even some members of your own alliance have been sending us unofficial support. She gestured to the viewing screens. Around the chamber, which now showed star maps marking the growing network of worlds aligned with Earth. You see, something interesting happened when we answered that call for help. We proved that the Vorthak could be beaten. Not easily, and not without cost, but beaten. Every species in this chamber has known that for centuries. But none of you were willing to try. The delegate from the Stellar Federation stood up, his bioluminescent skin flashing with agitation. Your reckless actions have destabilized the entire region. The Vorthak are mobilizing their full fleet. There will be war on a scale not seen for generations. There was already war, Jung replied. The Vorthak have been conquering and enslaving for decades while you all pretended not to notice. The only difference now is that someone is finally fighting back. High Admiral Thexmore of the Trade Consortium activated his communication device. The economic implications alone could devastate commerce throughout 3 sectors. The cost of your intervention will be measured in trillions of credits and millions of lives. Jung walked closer to the Trade Consortium's section. And what was the cost of doing nothing? How many worlds has the Vorthak Empire conquered while you worried about your profit margins? How many species have been enslaved while you calculated the economic impact of resistance? She turned back to address the full assembly. My government sent me here with a simple message. Humanity will continue to answer calls for help, regardless of whether you approve or not. We will defend innocent people against tyranny, whether you help us or hinder us. And we will judge every species in this chamber by how they respond when evil needs to be stopped. The chamber erupted in angry voices as delegates shouted over each other. Some demanded that humanity be expelled from galactic space. Others called for economic sanctions. A few, quietly, began discussing what mutual defense agreements might look like. Meanwhile, in Earth's orbital shipyards, Captain Kang Woo-jin watched, the final components being installed on the new battleship Soul's Pride. The vessel incorporated the best of human engineering with technology provided by their new allies, creating something that was more than the sum of its parts. Final systems. Check complete, reported Chief Engineer Yang Do-hyun. All weapon systems operational. The hybrid plasma cannons are showing 97% efficiency. And the new shields? Tyrian technology integrated with our power systems. Should stop anything the Vorthak can throw at us, Kang nodded with satisfaction. Earth's fleet now numbered 400 ships, most of them more advanced than anything they had fielded just 6 months ago. But more importantly, they weren't fighting alone anymore. Captain, called Communications Officer Park Jun-ho. We're receiving a priority transmission from the Kepler 442b colony. The main screen flickered to life, showing Administrator Park Hyun-woo standing in what had once been a ruined command center. Behind him, Kang could see new construction and bustling activity as the colony rebuilt itself. Captain Kang, it's good to see a friendly face, Hyun-woo said with a smile. I wanted to personally thank you and your crew for what you did for us. The memorial garden is nearly complete. Every human who died saving our colony will be remembered. They didn't die for gratitude, Kang replied. They died because it was right. I know. That's what makes it so remarkable. On the bridge of the colony ship New Busan, Marine Colonel Shin Jae-ho briefed his troops on their next mission. Intelligence had identified 3 more worlds under Vorthak's siege, and Earth's new rapid response fleet was preparing to intervene. Remember, he told his assembled Marines, we're not just fighting for those colonists. We're fighting for the idea that innocent people deserve protection no matter where they are or who they are. Sergeant Bae So-young raised her hand. Sir, what if the Galactic Council tries to stop us? Then they'll learn what happens when you stand between humans and people who need help, Shin replied grimly. The news networks across civilized space couldn't stop talking about humanity's growing influence. Some called them dangerous radicals who threatened galactic stability. Others hailed them as the champions the galaxy had been waiting for. On the independent world of Drexel Prime, thousands of citizens gathered in the capital square to watch the news broadcasts. When the human fleet arrived to break the Vorthak siege of their planet, the celebration could be heard from orbit. They came, whispered Dr. Lyrax, the planet's chief scientist, tears streaming down her scaled face. Everyone said no one would help us, but they came. But not every response was positive. In the halls of the Vorthak High Command, Supreme Commander Vorthak Gen studied reports of humanity's expanding alliance with growing fury. These creatures are spreading like a plague, he snarled to his assembled generals. Every world they liberate becomes another enemy to our empire. They must be stopped before their madness infects the entire galaxy. Supreme Commander, ventured General Nem, still bearing the scars of his defeats. Perhaps we should consider a diplomatic solution. The humans seem willing to negotiate if we cease our expansion into their territories. Gen's roar of rage echoed through the chamber. Negotiate? With animals that use their ships as weapons? We are the Vorthak Empire. We do not negotiate with inferior species. Then we face a war unlike any in our history. Nem replied quietly. The humans don't fight like other species. They don't calculate odds or weigh costs. They simply refuse to lose. But Gen had already made his decision. Orders went out across the Empire to mobilize every available ship. If the humans wanted war, they would have it on Earth. Admiral Choi Mi-young stood in the memorial park dedicated to those who had fallen at Kepler 442b. Thousands of names were carved into black stone, each one representing someone who had chosen to risk everything for strangers. Do you think they'd be proud of what we've built? Asked Dr. Yoon Soo-jin, joining the admiral at the memorial. I think they'd be proud that their sacrifice meant something, Choi replied. That we didn't let their deaths be the end of the story. The Vorthak are mobilizing everything they have. Our intelligence estimates suggest they'll have over 1,000 ships within the next few months. And how many ships will we have? 600 of our own, plus whatever our allies can contribute. Maybe 800 total. Choi nodded. The odds were still against them, but somehow that felt appropriate. Humanity had always done its best work when the situation seemed impossible. Then, We'd better make sure those 800 ships count for something. As the two women stood in silence among the memorial stones,